Hello, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm finally going to be talking about my book. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Carly, and I published my own book, The Difference of Italic and Bold, last year, and today I'm going to be talking about it, and why it's bad. Yes, believe it or not, I'm going to be talking about why my book kind of sucks, and why it's just straight up not a good book. I planned to make this video a long time ago when I first published the book, and even then I knew I was going to be making this video about why it's bad. So hopefully if you're watching this video and you plan on writing a book, or you want to, or you're just interested in the writing process in general, you can watch this, not make the same mistakes I did, and just get more perspective from somebody who's written and published a book. This video might get kind of long, so I'm going to divide it into 5 different parts so you can kind of skip around if you want to. I'll put timestamps in the description and like what each part is about. Part 1 is kind of going to be the backstory, part 2 will be my writing process, part 3 will be more about the self-publishing process, part 4 will be the biggest mistakes and regrets that I have about the book, and then part 5 will kind of be like an overview and just talking about a bunch of general things. So without further ado, let's get started with part 1, the backstory. So I've always loved writing in general, but back in 7th grade is really when I kind of made this goal of I really want to write a book and I really want to get one published before I graduate high school. And in 7th grade, I had written this poem that my teacher really liked, and so she had me enter it in a bunch of contests, and I ended up being the 2016 7th grade poet laureate. And I don't have it with me now, but that poem that I wrote back then is in like a poetry book somewhere in the world right now. And so from that point on, it kind of boosted my ego, and I was like, you know what, I want to write a book and it's gonna be great. And well, needless to say, I did it. I published a book actually a week before I graduated high school, and I worked on it basically all of my senior year, but unfortunately it's not as good as I wish it was. So to give a quick overview on what my book is about, this is my book, The Difference of Italic and Bold. I classify it as a short romance novella, a poetry collection, and a short story collection. So my book is basically about these 2 writers who move to the city to pursue their dreams, but kind of lose their spark and love for writing. Until one day, the 2 of them meet in a park and figure out that they're both writers. And so from this, they decide to help each other rekindle their love for writing by meeting up in the park every night and reading their stories to each other. And they do this under the condition that they stay completely anonymous, so they don't know each other's names, or their phone numbers, or where they live, or who their friends are, nothing. All they know is that they meet up in the park every night and read each other's stories and poems that they've written. Hence why the book is called The Difference of Italic and Bold. Those are their nicknames throughout the book, because you don't know their actual names. So basically, the book is kind of just following their relationship as it grows, and because they're reading stories and poems to each other, you get to read their stories and poems too. So in each chapter, there's one short story or poem that's read independently, or can be read independently from the main plot. But I kind of made it a point to make sure that these short stories kind of like gave some sort of insight on their feelings and their emotions, and like foreshadowing, and stuff like that. And that leads us to part 2, my writing process. So because I knew I wanted this concept of short stories and poems to be within a narrative, I started with those. So basically what I did was I had this one document that I just started filling with random ass short stories and poems. Just anything I could come up with, I would write down and I would put it in there. And so once I thought I had enough of those, then I decided to actually start making the actual book manuscript. So I started writing the characters in and the setting and just like forming this world of Italic and Bold around these stories and poems. That ended up being a big mistake because I ended up backtracking a lot because of this. I knew I wanted the short stories and poems to give some sort of insight on how the characters were feeling, but that doesn't really work when the stories and poems are pre-written. They just weren't giving the information or emotions that I wanted them to give, and so I ended up deleting almost half of the book at that point. So that set me back quite a bit, having to delete a lot of what I have already written. And then from then on, my writing process got really choppy and inconsistent. Basically, I would write for like a month straight, and then the next month I wouldn't write at all. And it would just be like that for a couple months. And on top of that, I also decided I wanted to illustrate my book. So I had to draw a bunch of things for each chapter. Despite all this, I somehow, over the course of a couple months, finished my book. Which brings us to part 3 of this video, the self-publishing process. So I published my book through KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing. It's basically this program through Amazon where you can basically, anybody can write a book and put it on there, and then it's for sale on Amazon. I can't remember exactly what the percentage cut is for the pay, but you definitely get the majority of the money. And you're also allowed to price the book at whatever price you want, as long as it's more than the printing cost. I chose that just because it was really convenient for me. I didn't really want to go through the steps of trying to get an agent and a publishing company because I was not there yet. But yeah, KDP just makes it really easy to self-publish, so if you're planning on doing that, I highly recommend that. They have it so that your book becomes available in either paperback or ebook or both, and they take care of everything. So if somebody buys your book, Amazon prints it, Amazon ships it out, and that's it. However, I will say one thing though, which this is my fault. Honestly, it is, but it was a really stupid mistake that I made. If you are writing a book, please, for the love of God, write it in a good program. I recommend Microsoft Word because KDP likes Microsoft Word. There's a couple other programs that I've heard work good for KDP as well, but I recommend Microsoft Word. And if you're wondering why, it's because I'm stupid and I was in high school, and really the only writing program I used was Google Docs. Don't use Google Docs. For the love of God, don't. KDP does not like Google Docs. It does not like its files or its setup or its margins or anything. So my entire manuscript was written in Google Docs. And when I tried to convert it into KDP, it did not work. It messed up all the pages, all of everything was screwed up. And I didn't have a Microsoft Word account or anything like that, so I actually had to send my manuscript to my mom, who has Microsoft Word at her, on her work computer. And from there, I had to go through the very long process of editing. Editing your book is also one of the most time-consuming parts. Sometimes it can take even longer than writing the book, and it is extremely tedious, but it is something that needs to be done so that your book looks the way you want it to. And even still, my book, there are some things that I don't like about it. There are some poems that split off into 2 pages that I didn't want to happen. There's all kinds of stuff that I wish looked better in my book, but I just wasn't experienced, and I was also rushing, so it just didn't get done. On top of editing it myself, I also got a lot of help from friends and even teachers. I ended up actually emailing my manuscript to all of my teachers from my school, including my middle school one, who inspired this in the first place. Basically, I handed it over and I was like, hey, do you want to check out my book before I publish it? Give me some thoughts on it and all this. And so it technically got somewhat peer-reviewed, and that was actually really helpful. They gave me a lot of good advice. There's also another author in my town who I'm friends with who actually helped me kind of understand how KDP works and answered any questions I had, which was really helpful. Fun fact, at the end of my book, I actually have a thank you note of all the people who helped me either peer review or give me advice or all that stuff. But yeah, just saying, editing and revising is I'd say the most important part of writing a book. And it's unfortunately something that I should have done more of. Although I did a lot, I should have done a lot more and spent a lot more time on it. And this brings me into part 4, the major mistakes that I made with my book and why I think it's bad. So the reason I don't think I spent enough time on this book is because of the stupid deadline I made up for myself. Like I stated before, in 7th grade, I was like, I want to publish my own book before I graduate high school. And so that was the deadline I gave myself. And because I started this right at the beginning of senior year, that didn't give me a lot of time. And it's not like anything bad was going to happen if I didn't publish it by then. It was just kind of a personal thing where I was like, if I don't get it done by then, I'm a failure and it's not good enough and I'm not going to be proud of it. And that's obviously not true because I did get it done before I graduated high school and I'm still not proud of it. That's a lie. I am proud of my book. I just wish it was better. So that's my first piece of advice. Do not give yourself a stupid deadline if you don't need to. And if you do need to have a deadline, make sure you give yourself plenty of time to get done what you need to get done. Another big thing that I don't like about my book, and I think is the biggest reason I think it's a bad book, is just the story in general. It is extremely repetitive and extremely boring and bleak. Not to mention, it's extremely predictable. I mean, you read the back cover or listen to the description that I gave of the plot before, when this video started, and basically you've read the entire book. 2 writers meet up and read to each other each night, and it's a romance novel. I wonder what happens in this book. That's basically it, they read to each other and they fall in love. that's it. Yeah, there are some things here and there that happen that are like, oh, but like it's not enough to like make you want to keep reading, and it's not enough to keep the story interesting and like fresh. Every chapter ends the same, every chapter starts the same. It is just so repetitive and just so like, why am I reading this? And I don't think that's completely the stories or the plot's fault. There were things that I could have done with this plot that could have been really cool and could have been really interesting, and like, you know, I should have built more of a world and more of like things that could happen instead of just the same thing over and over again. And I think a big part of that is just I just didn't have time and I rushed it too much. The editing process also should have been much more fleshed out. One thing that's really annoying is that there are typos in my book. I think there's at least 2 that I know of, maybe 3. Another mistake that I made that I wish I did was I didn't make this into an ebook version. I had planned to have it both available in paperback and ebook, but I was just too lazy to make it into an ebook because there are some things you slightly need to do differently for KDP in order to have it published as an ebook. I was too lazy to do that. By the time it was published in paperback, I was not super proud of it. I didn't really love it, so I just didn't find any worth in publishing it in an ebook form. And that's another big mistake, is that I left this book not feeling super happy about it. I'm super proud of myself for actually completing it and actually getting it done. And I don't think it's the worst book in the world, but it's far from being great. I think something I should have done, and if you're writing a book, you should definitely do this, is read more books. And also just write short stories and poems and whatever you like to write, just write in your free time as much as you can. Because this was high school me, where I didn't like reading because, you know, being assigned reading projects every week during school, I really hated. I hated writing in school because all I could write were research essays and reports and analysis, and I hated that. And now that it's multiple months later and I have started reading books again and I've started writing for fun again, I noticed so many things that would have been so helpful to have while writing this. After reading and writing books, you know, it's like, oh wow, this is what good writing is, this is what bad writing is. Like, I know what the good and bad parts of books are, and I know what to avoid and what to do. And I didn't have that knowledge while I was writing this, and that would have been really useful. So that's definitely something, if you're writing a book, make sure you already are an avid reader, or at least read a few books before you start writing yours, just so you can get some sort of idea on like how it should be structured. Okay, leading on to part 5, the overview. So I don't think my book is all bad. There are some things I do like about it. For example, the overall concept I think is somewhat original, and I do really like it, how it's kind of like a different story each chapter while you're still keeping up with the same bigger one throughout. I also really like my use of dialogue. The reason it's called The Difference of Italic and Bold is because all of their dialogue is written in italic and bold. For example, I know this is backwards, but for example, all of Italic's lines are written in italic and all of Bold's lines are written in bold. I'm also really happy with the fact that I illustrated this all by myself. I designed the entire cover, the back cover, all of the images. I did it all in kind of a very doodly, fun, very like minimalistic style. And I do like most of them, although there are some drawings that I just, again, rushed on and I don't like whatsoever. For example, this one, it's supposed to be like a mermaid tail. It looks like some weird sort of claw. But other than that, I do like most of the drawings in my book, and I do like the fact that I illustrated it. I also really like the fact that I used a lot of made-up words in my book. And by that I mean I literally came up with words that do not exist and just wrote them in the book. It's actually funny because when my teachers were peer reviewing this, one of my teachers who specializes in like teaching Shakespeare messaged me, and she was like, you know, there's a couple words in here that like they don't exist, like they're not in the dictionary. And I messaged her back and I'm just like, oh, I know, but like the way I think about it is if Shakespeare can make up words, why can't I? And I must say she really liked my response to that. Another thing I would like to mention is writer's block. I liked to blame a lot of my procrastination on writer's block, and that just isn't okay. Because if I'm being honest, I don't really think writer's block exists. Yes, you can be in the mood and not in the mood for writing, but if you're actually taking the time to write a book and you want to get it done, the best thing you can do is just force yourself to sit down and start writing, even if you don't feel inspired, even if you don't want to, just sit down and do it anyways. Now, obviously, when you're in that mindset where you're forcing yourself to sit down and write, the best stuff probably isn't going to come out, but that's okay as long as something comes out, because you can fix it later on. Another big thing that you have to learn while you're writing a book is that you're going to have so many setbacks. There's going to be times where you have to delete an entire paragraph or an entire page or an entire chapter of your book, and it sucks, and it makes you feel sucky, but it's very important to do that, because if you're not happy with something you've written, don't leave it as just good enough like I did. Just get rid of it and start again. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Hopefully this video was helpful to you if you're into writing or are writing a book. Maybe you've read my book, and if you have, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. It's funny because the only feedback I've received on my book is positive feedback, like only compliments, only like, oh, it's so great, which is hard because like a big part of me is like, it's really not, but thank you anyways. But yeah, other than that, that's it for this video, and thank you very much for watching.